show is a little bit different in the sense that I'm looking at how to
And good day, and welcome to Ocean Freight TV. I'm your host, Steve Ferreira, CEO of Ocean Audit and Ocean Freight TV. Geez, I have to kind of crack up on that promo shot there of 911 for containers. It reminds me of the heady days of watching Star Trek and Scotty telling Captain Kirk, at least I want to believe that this is the case. I've got it breathing again. The engines are breathing again. We put this beautiful starship on life support and we got it back. So this is kind of the way I look at the ocean freight container shipping industry as of today. It's like Scotty to Captain Kirk, we got it breathing again, Captain. So just thought of that in the last 10 seconds. Welcome to the show. I'm Steve Ferrer, your host again. So nice to have you here on a LinkedIn Live edition of Ocean Freight TV. I was thinking a lot about the triage events that have kind of gone on in container shipping, and from the fresh kind of heady days of TPM 2023. By the way, I have to say, I've been to so many TPMs in my 40 years in the maritime industry, and this last one was by far the best I've ever seen. I don't know what it was. It was the combination of a return from post-pandemic. It was a return that we all have a lot of work to do. It was a return that the patient is kind of critical and we need some healing. I think the TPM was just remarkable, and it's kind of interesting to see us still on that landing strip as we maneuver from TPM, or maybe on the taxiway of the TPM, and now we're starting to spread our own wings, and it's time to take a leap of faith forward in terms of what our contracts are, what our outlooks are for 2023, and certainly what we're going to do about cost containment and recovery strategies on the heady days of Containergeddon, seeing that it's in the news every day with the Biden administration always touting the so-called superpowers of the Federal Maritime Commission. Now, before we start our show today, I want to talk a little bit. My theme is really about the healing process of the patient, the container patient, because I look at the container patient as rather ill right now. And if you think about, who's there to resuscitate, right? It's the ocean vendors, the freight forwarders, other colleagues, your own internal folks, your controller, your finance guy giving you more or less budget. There are a lot of people that come in and save the day. And I think it's really interesting if you look at, the incredible press over the last 6 months, not only of, for example, the Biden administration and how dangerous the shipping cartels are, and how the FMC is going to come in and how OSHA is going to just totally reform things and, make it fair for the American consumer. Folks, it ain't happening. I'll tell you. Today's show takes special public data from the FMC and just blows the door really off of, what those good folks are trying to do. Now, listen, I love certain individuals at the FMC. Over the years, I've served as a expert witness testifying at the FMC, I think 4 times, maybe 5 times. And I've had nothing but good interactions. The people are well-intentioned, well-positive, thoughtful, thoughtful, forward-thinking folks. But things move very slow at the FMC. and some of the things that have been touted as solutions, especially as it relates to detention and demurrage. And, frankly, when I started Ocean Audit some 30 plus years ago, detention and demurrage was just a twinkle in my eye. I mean, it was always the core ocean freight that we would be looking at. And obviously the other accessorials, but detention and demurrage rarely came into play. And today it's the soup du jour, and we're going to talk a little bit, actually we're going to talk a lot about the fallout of the process and how that administrative process caused by the Biden administration and the FMC has actually promulgated putting the patient on a little bit of life support. But first, before we start, I wanted to talk about and give my friends and followers an update on the ILWU, Pacific Maritime Association, contract nuances and mixed messaging coming out of the ILWU and the Pacific Maritime Association. Yesterday, the acclaimed author and I guess I could say burgeoning friend, Paul Berger of the Wall Street Journal, whose work I respect so much, updated us all on what the ILWU was seeing as positive steps towards a negotiation process. PMA came out today and said, whoa, not so fast. And so I just want to read to you a little bit of the, I just want to read to you a little bit of the two statements and to help to give my audience a flavor or a flair for how this is playing out. So today, this is a quote from Gene Soroka of the Port of Los Angeles. So today's announcements from the ILWU that key issues have been tentatively agreed upon is welcome news, said Port of Los Angeles Executive Director Gene Soroka. Quote, it's important that the ILWU and PMA remain at the table and complete the negotiations swiftly so we can bring the stability and confidence that our customers have been seeking. There is no bigger priority now than this contract agreement, end quotes. Now, however, meanwhile, work actions led by the ILWU Local 13 at the Port of LA and Long Beach continue to disrupt some operational work at the key marine terminals. The union seems to be deliberately conducting inspections that are not routine, they're unscheduled, and done in a way that disrupt terminal operations. This is a quote from the PMA. So I think the issue here is as negotiation continues, the ILWU and the PMA, they have to remain committed, obviously, to reach a final agreement. But right now, we're still in a point where there are still some unsettled issues that the PMA has brought up that lead us to believe that we may not be necessarily any closer to a settlement as the ILWU agreement or a press release yesterday might have had us to believe. So I think that everyone that is thinking of, sugar fairies and, warm hot chocolate, you might want to put that away for another day. I don't think there's any safety zone yet that we're in, that we've landed in, where we're going to be able to say we saved the day and the negotiations are complete. With that said, I think it's really an interesting dynamic. If you start to look at the problems at the port, what about the problems within the container itself? What about your problems as importers? And, when we start our show today, we ignore the symptoms of Containergeddon. I think the idea here is what you consumed 2 years ago, just like a bad food you'd eat. And if you go and have a treatment without diagnosis or self-diagnosis, then you have there's nothing I can do mentality about it. I've got this illness. I think that we tend to ignore the symptoms of what the problems are with the patient. And I'm talking about the container patient. And with the container, I'm using it as a prop really to talk about your organization and your finances and the spend that you've consummated during the heady days of Containergeddon. So consuming, literally 10 times your normal ocean freight budget, yeah, that's a problem. And you treated it really without looking at the root cause. You paid the bills. And it does kind of fall into that, well, if I don't, I'm not going to get on the ship. I think I made a good point in terms of what one of the root causes are of the patient being sick, the container patient being sick. And I think that, the first thing you do is, what do you do when you go to, the patient's sick, right? You go to the ER. And in some cases, you end up kind of getting treated by somebody that might have skipped the intern part of the training. I have a case in one of my Ocean Audit clients where there was a freight audit and pay, or their talent. I found this story secondhand from the client, my client. The person auditing the ocean freight was a Birmingham, Alabama LCL truck manager that the freight audit and pay, or auditor, had assigned to the client's ocean freight. And they totally blew like a $5 million or $6 million recovery on a $100 million ocean spend, because what's their expertise? So it's like, yeah, it sounds really nuanced, right? And CFOs literally love the safety valve of a one-stop shop. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And one-stop shop in terms of recovery auditing or triaging the spend is really an abject failure. And this is a really good case of this $100 million issue where that Birmingham LTL manager could probably run rings around me with regards to Birmingham LTL to Miami LTL. I wouldn't know a single thing about how to audit that. But as far as their scope, and looking at Navashiva, India to Des Moines, Iowa, not a chance, right? So I think that when you don't have the right training and protocols, anything that you put up to navigate that is nothing more than a false front. And you end up sitting in this emergency room and the patient bleeds to death, right? And the finances bleed to death. And it's very similar to the other theme that I'm going to explore today, that the FMC can't teach you the Heimlich, the container Heimlich, right? So in other words, the FMC might be great at bringing up a 1942 case that they would cite in some 2023 nuanced case on ocean freight law, maritime law. But they're not going to be able to kind of give you the choke and you spit out the millions of dollars in refunds. No one's going to be able to teach you that. And the thing about it is, and I say it to with love to my brothers and sisters in logistics, who the show is always dedicated to. Hi guys, your job descriptions kind of suck. I mean, you fell into a lot of roles where it says, oh, geez, global logistics manager, director, negotiate, monitor, audit, right? And come on, these men and women and professionals, they're procurement, logistics savvy, freight hounds that are doing everything, running the company to get the product on the shelf. The last thing that you want a logistics manager or director is to have a title of freight audit, right? And that's just not cutting it in today's era, in today's world, and that helps to mask the symptoms, so to speak. And so oftentimes I think what's needed, right, in looking at this, geometrically, is some kind of intervention. And when you look at that, it's like, goes back to my previous statement. FAP means freight audit and payment companies. Yeah, gosh, I'm CFO of a mid-level company. We spent, $50 million on ocean. The other year we spent $5 million. Yeah, I need a freight audit and pay company. I need a policeman. I need an intern, right, to come in. And wow, what a drug that is, right? Because they come in and listen, I love freight audit and pay companies. The reason why, they very rarely get the ocean quadrant right. They blow it, and they leave so much available that it becomes a real embarrassment for them to say, okay, well, geez, okay, yeah, we're one-stop shopping, and we did really well on the parcel and the LTL. Yeah, maybe we missed a few things on the ocean, but no problem. We'll move on, and we'll learn from our mistakes. Meanwhile, the CFO is paying incredible transaction costs for them to make an error, and then to have the client pay me to come in and do the emergency surgery on the refunds. Freight audit and pay companies are extremely interesting and one of the most wonderful things for recovery auditing, because all the data and all the basket of data that you would need to have a literally a 60-minute identified recovery is already right there in the FAP data. So it's a drug and a curse, right? It almost should come with a contraindication warning when you sign up with a freight audit and pay company. And it's almost like, they're introducing themselves, and again, I'm Jane, I'm Steve, I'm Bill, and I'm an invoice abuser, right? I'll take a look at your invoices, but the person auditing your invoices might be as good as the plumber that gave you the tooth filling or the dentist that fixed your leaky faucet, right? The two just don't mix. And so when you want to do an intervention on spend recovery and putting the container from 911 to, a more normal stasis, you bring in the right people, the right specialists. However, I can tell you that it's really interesting. If there are anybody out there in my audience today that uses a freight audit and pay company, you can be assured that you have a 6-figure refund. Absolutely, mandatorily coming back to you. And the great thing about it is it's all contained in that beautiful freight audit and pay portal. So it's just like flip a switch, gets post-audited, the FAP suffers that maximum pain, embarrassment. You get some corrective action. Maybe you get a payback from the FAP on the post-audit cost. But you really need an intervention if you're using a freight audit and pay company. You need an intervention if you're doing this internally. And you need an intervention if you're doing it with a post-auditor that is really mechanized or weaponized to have their expertise in the LCL or small parcel skill set. Now, those guys are great, right? But again, I'm 40 years in the trade, and I just recovered 1.1 million in 10 days, and the FMC recovered 700,000 in 6 months, right? Who are you going to call, right? Not the Ghostbusters, but it's obviously you've got to go with where the specialization is. I implore you that Container Health is seeking an intervention, and seeking an intervention means incredible rewards of recovery of working capital that you never thought you had, and you saw this capital just sink. And it really reminds me of the fact that when you look at the capital sinking, it's just kind of getting frostburn. And, it's not just COVID where you lose your taste sensation. It's ocean. The more that time goes on, the deeper this container settles into the elements. And the ocean vendors love deep ice, right? Because the more that this container sinks below the surface, the more time that they put between you and their money, your money and them, excuse me. And the idea here is, remember, one of the things that did come out of the original Shipping Reform Act that still is with us to this day is a 3-year mandatory statute of limitations on recoveries. So I'm still able to go back to 2020, and even in some special cases, which I won't get into today, 2019 and beyond, and even older, to recover these frozen ocean refunds, both ocean freight, detention, and demurrage. So again, I think when you look at who you're going to call, right? You're going to have your FAP do this. You're going to have an internal auditor do it. No. Is it going to go to accounts payable? Guys, you'd be so surprised how many invoices go to accounts payable and just got kind of rubber stamped, leaving everyone up in arms in terms of what happened. But if you look at somebody that had 20,000 hours, which is a little bit more than an outlier expert, you could say, okay, gives them some credibility in terms of looking at the ocean invoice. But how about somebody like myself, right, that is designated as 40,000 outlier hours? Folks, with regards to ocean freight and refund recovery and triaging the patient, there's nothing I've seen, done, taste, felt, or smelt that would ever be anything unique. So, it's like Picasso painting the right paint color. How did he know back in the day to mix and tone and shape and flash the paint a certain way? Well, it's an art and a science. And I think that that's one of the things that comes into play with regards to saving the patient, right? I mean, even if you went to Harvard Medical School and you're a first-year resident, you're not going to be able to treat the patient as well as a surgeon that has 25 or 30 years service. And it's the same way in ocean freight refund recovery. It's that you're looking for the best, and sometimes, again, this is kind of a gateway type thing. And I've seen it a million times in the FAP, freight audit and pay pitches. They come into the FCFO. We will put a ring around your ocean spend. We put a ring around your logistics spend. One-stop shopping. There used to be a mutual fund called USAA Cornerstone. I'm a big, I love investing, so this doesn't exist anymore. And I'll tell you why. USAA Cornerstone Fund was a mutual fund that specialized, I think, 25% bonds, 25% equities, 25% commodities, and I want to say 25% futures. It sounded good. You get a blend of each asset category, but it really sucked. It was a very poor performing fund, and I think USAA withdrew the fund due to lack of interest. But to me, it sounded great at first. But I got suckered into that mentality, that generalist mentality. Have you got suckered into it at your organization? Are you using a freight audit and pay company? Are you using a general auditor? Ocean Audit, to my mind, in my survey in the last 30 years, is the only exclusive designated ocean freight auditing entity that handles 20 of the Fortune 100. So when we look through this and we go into the diagnosis and discharge of the patient, which we really want to do, the ocean freight is really an MRI machine, right? So if you look at an MRI, you see the detailed images, you can see the systems bubbling and percolating, right? We don't often see that as individual stakeholders. But really there is a wonder drug. And the wonder drug of the ocean freight MRI is the fact that you have core competency experts to be able to give the patient a diagnostic treatment plan going forward. And so in this case, right, obviously the diagnostic treatment plan is to move to the core capabilities and spread the heel throughout the finance, supply chain, logistics suite by taking on big business, big ocean carriers, big freight forwarders, and basically slaying them in the fact of looking at the invoice trajectory from 2020 and 2023. I mean, if you think about, I'm trying to think of the best analogy. Let's say there was a game where you take dice and you just throw them against the wall and it comes to 26,200. And then the next dice you throw is 24,200. And that's the amount you pay. That's a lot like the general capabilities that BCOs went through. It was a roll of the dice. It's actually a good analogy. But when you move away from that and you move toward really the logic and philosophy of dissecting, well, how did the ocean vendor want you to behave? The ocean vendor caused this behavior. Maybe the ocean vendor wasn't the right surgeon. Maybe the surgeon maybe that was the chicken and the fox guarding the hen house, but you got all the advice from the fox. And then you move that responsibility to a very generalist approach where you go maybe at first level intern, first level ER. And they might send you home with a little, pill bag and say, if anything raises these symptoms, call these 4 specialists. So it seems to me that's where we are. And I thought I did a great job laying out for you today, why the patient, 911, the container patient, is in jeopardy right now because he has been overbought. He's been overbought by magnitudes that you could only dream of. And so anyone that wants a new WMS, and anyone that wants a new TMS, anyone that wants to hire, a couple of full-time equivalents, anyone that wants a year's worth of, and I'll tell you what, this is the analogy that I thought about before I move on to the next part of my show. Here's the analogy. So, okay, we had $24,000 ocean rates and 2021, 2022. Now we've got, say, 1,000 or 2,000. Do you realize that when I come in And like, for example, last week I got a client 1.4 million, and I get a percentage of that. So half of that, right? So the client has 700,000. Do you realize how many containers 700,000 at 2,000 a container can pay for? I might as well title today's show "Free Container Money." Folks, it's that simple. It really is. And so as I talk to you through the process, I want to compare and contrast that, what I do as a surgeon, to what some of these, I shouldn't use the word hacks, but some of these interns that are kind of learning their way through the forest might treat you. And let's talk about one of my favorite ones to put up because it's so public, and it's the Federal Maritime Commission and their use of the new charge complaint process. Now, this is a process that out of the Biden administration, the Federal Maritime Commission decided to go ahead with regards to instigating charge complaints. Now, mainly these are detention demurrage complaints. The main part of this study shows that in 6 months, the FMC only refunded $700,000 in charges. I mean, this is child's play. It really is laughable what has happened with regards to the FMC's purview on ocean freight. They haven't done anything. And when you look at the shipping complaint process at the FMC, the left-hand side is what we had before the OSHRA. The right-hand side is the new requirements. Nothing's changed. The only thing that they've added after OSHRA is these silly charge complaints that have ended up giving clients a handful of funds. Nothing really special to speak of. And of course, charge complaints, who can file these charge complaints? Well, anyone really, shipper, consignee, trucker, third party. But when you see how the FMC words that, you see that it's really geared around detention and demurrage. Now, these charge complaint requirements have really a silly rule that you can't file them or you can't petition them for anything before June 16th, 2022. So it's clear that this is a device thrown at the detention and demurrage process. And, if I think about just skipping ahead a little bit, the process on these charge complaints really go into something what I call potential investigation outcomes. The whole idea was to show, well, not only are the ocean carriers doing something wrong, they're doing something illegal. So there's this big thing called order to show cause. And out of all the petitions, these 70 or 80 petitions that the FMC's received, there was only one order to show cause where, it might have been a combination between a refund and a legal action. And it had to do with a $1,000 invoice from MSC on congestion. So I will say that in closing on the FMC, if you think for 1 second the FMC is going to come in and save the day, you are so mistaken. Do not pass go. Do not go to the FMC. You will not be satisfied. I just want to go back to one slide before the end of my show. And it's the slide that says, it's the first one, use of new charge complaint process in 2022. You see the number of inquiries, the number of open investigations, the number of voluntary refunds. So what's happening is, as soon as the ocean vendor heard that the client is petitioning the FMC, it didn't even go through a hearing. The client might have said, "We want $1,000 in detention refunded." Okay, we're refunding it, because the ocean vendor didn't want to go through this process. But it's just not being used. No one knows how to do it. There's one order to show cause, and look at the low magnitude of refunds. Commercially. Clients can do so much better in terms of looking at someone like myself, Ocean Audit, where the FMC had a $700,000 recovery in detention demurrage in 6 months. I had $1 million in 10 days. And so it's really child's play when you look at how ocean freight refund and remediations can come into play. And that's really the crux of today's show, which I want to thank my audience for watching. Again, I'm Steve Ferreira, CEO of Ocean Audit. There are so many ways to heal the patient. Certainly the FMC is not one of them. I strongly discourage that. And instead, why don't you take an action and look internally through the process I just took you through, how you can heal yourself by working with experts like myself as one of the top thought leaders to help you not only gain lost working capital, but to help heal the sins of the past and the future with your ocean freight invoices and the costly spend associated with ocean freight. Well, until next week, I'm Steve Ferreira, your host. Thank you for watching Ocean Freight TV, and feel free to get back in touch with me or leave any comments here on LinkedIn. Until then, have a great weekend. I'm Steve Ferreira signing off. Thank you.